Hi, I'd like to walk you through the Easy Reporter release summary for Easy Suite Release 2022 R1. As part of this release, we focused on three key areas. First one is functionality, and we've added additional functionality for things like bulk execution of reports and exception reporting. From a reusability perspective, we've allowed for things like global mapping, where you can actually set up mapping that is used across multiple reports. And thirdly, legislative changes. So we've working across many different countries. We've continued to add fields from tables, info types and payroll clusters as they become either new added by SAP or customers request those. Okay, so let's jump into a bit more detail about each of the functionality enhancements. Okay, so the first one I'll walk through is bulk scheduling capability. So up until now, we've been able to schedule individual reports, but it's one at a time. So if you wanted to run 5 or 10 reports at a particular time, you had to schedule them individually. So now we've got bulk execution. Gets set up from the menu. So in the standard menu, where you can actually create reports, you've now got the bulk execution, maintenance and bulk execution. So we'll have a look at the maintenance first. So in the maintenance option, essentially you can set up a menu such as I've set up here called DS View Reports, and under that you can link in multiple reports. So what that means is there's 4 reports there, and each of those will be run one after the other as part of the scheduling of the group of reports. So for each one of those reports, you have a name, you have the report itself, gets scheduled in. You can actually go straight to that report as well if you want to have a look at it from this screen. And you can either run it directly using the selection criteria for all the same selection criteria for all of the reports, or you can have a variant. So this is where you set up the reports. Then secondly, when you actually go to run the bulk selection, you can actually select the group, the scenario group. So I've just selected the DS View Reports. You can give it a name so that you can uniquely identify that from the background execution, and then you run it. So, and when you run it, you actually enter the selections. Now, what that does is it pops up a screen that will allow you to enter in different selections, and the selections are used across all of the reports. So this means that you can say, I have 10 reports that might be end of pay period reports. And you can actually enter in your payroll area and the employees to be run if you need, or the selection criteria such as the payroll area. And each of those reports will be run using that selection criteria. So then from here you can then execute that report immediately, or this group immediately. So if there was 10 reports, each of those 10 reports will be run immediately. Or you can schedule the reports to be run at a particular time, including recurring scheduling. So that will be the way you schedule the reports. Now, if you actually want to see the reports that have been run and you're trying to maintain any of those, you can actually go into our background job overview, which you would be familiar with for normal background reports. In here, you can set a filter for the run type of bulk run, and you can see all of the runs executed. So for example, this one up here, I had previously scheduled one called DS Test Background 3. So we can see when it was scheduled and when it's actually planned to be run next. And we can also click on the button here to modify the selections or see exactly what selection criteria you had, which essentially will take you back to this screen here. This screen here, where you enter in the criteria. So that's the bulk scheduling. So next one is the global mapping functionality. So you can now from the create screen of the Easy Reporter, you can click on global mapping. Essentially that allows you to create different mappings that can be used in different reports. So it allows you to really set up a generic mapping. You have a name that uniquely identifies it, a description for that, a description for the type of field you want to use because you need to link that into each individual report, and then the mapping criteria. So in this case, we're mapping legacy codes from an import file from a legacy non-SAP system into SAP wage type, so we can compare the two. Then you can use this mapping in a standard mapping field. So what you'll see that there's now a predefined mapping area where you can then select the actual mapping, global mapping field to use. You can link in the field that it will use for the mapping itself, and then the mapping criteria will come in. So the good thing is you might have 10 reports using the same mapping field, and you can just go back and add extra mapping, and that will be included into all of those 10 reports because it's dynamically loaded. Other than the fact that it's reusable, it works pretty much the same as the standard mapping within Easy Reporter. Now this has been linked into both the mapping fields and the import file mapping, but has not been linked into the advanced mapping yet. That will come in future releases. Okay, next one is exception setup. So what we've seen over the time is often people want to do data checking in their system, and they use Easy Reporter to check certain fields, and they set up reports such as address reports and employee detail reports, and then they put in mapping fields that put out essentially error messages. But what that means is that if one record or one person with maybe 50 fields of their master data, if they have any issues in there, then you have 50 mapping fields and they get filled out with different information. But it's probably difficult to administer that and actually look through that, sort it and so on, because they're all on the similar line and so on. So what we can do with the new exception reporting is essentially take any of the fields from a report and set up exception messages. So in this case, I've set it up to have an exception message for each employee number, a single message that comes out. So you can set up the exception messages to have any fields in there, but in this case I just want the employee number and name. I'll show you the output of this in a moment. The exception messages also can be reached from the main report. So when you run your normal report, in this case this report has all of these fields, I can click on a button to display the exception messages. Alternatively, I can actually have the messages come straight up if you want to just show the errors. Then secondly is the exception setup gets built through this screen. So what we have is the individual exception messages. So in this case, I've got 6 different exception messages, and I can just continue to add more. So there's no real limits here. So for example, if I want to look for a field that's blank, the permanent address city field is blank, I might want to look for an age over a certain threshold, first name blank, last name blank, and so on. Each of these will actually produce an extra row of data onto the exception report if there's a message. And for each of these, then I can put a description, a header, I can put the exception message, and I can include fields from the report into the message. So for example, if I was over a certain age, I can put the field AND or indicator AND, and that will actually insert the value from the field 1 into that section of the text. And at the bottom here, I can set my exception messages. So essentially, I can say either in this case, the city is equal to blank, or I might want to say the first name, I have one called first name equals last name. I might say the first name include field equal, and I can select last name. Across to the further across the screen, I actually have ands and ors, so you can actually build up quite complex criteria if you need. So let's now have a look at the output of this. So here's our report. On the report, we have the display exception. So this will only display if you've set up exception messages. And by clicking on this, I can now actually see the exceptions that come out for this data. So in this case, I've sorted by employee number and name, and you can see here, for example, this person has their permanent address has been blank, and their street and house number is blank. So essentially it will show you a line, a row for each individual exception message. Really allows you to streamline and set up some good warning messages on your reports, and especially for things like interface files. You can now set up some really nice output on the raw data that the report would produce. The next one's the merge functionality. So merge is quite a complex and but flexible bit of functionality that allows you to merge multiple records together. And up until now, the merge has only been run at a very specific spot. So what we've done is made a few changes here. So firstly is you can actually have multiple merge settings now. So that means that you can run complete separate merges of different data. So you might want to merge records together in a particular way using certain unique fields. Then you might want to let certain processing go on, and then you might want to do another merge, for example, right near the end of the report. So we have 3 merge settings. They all work exactly the same as the current merge, but they're run individually. Then secondly, we actually then have the merge timing, and you can actually have the standard default timing that you have right now. We have an early merge, which is prior to all of the substring mappings and concatenates, and then a final merge, which is right at, prior to the final report output. So this really, it's probably an advanced feature, but it allows us to really get around some complex issues at different times. With the interface files, we can now, so if you're bringing in data from an external interface import file, we can now include header fields in that interface file. So this just simply allows us to say the first row, we've got one row of header fields, and when it imports the file, it will ignore that line. At the moment it's not doing it, but the intent is also that the import settings will also show then the details from that header line, so that when you map up marry the fields from the import file to the fields on the report, you can actually see the header information. I think that'll be part of our final release. I've only just noticed that that's not fully working at this point. Now, when you're setting up complex interfaces, one of the challenges, especially 20, 30, 40 field interfaces, one of the challenges was marrying up the fields from the header to the fields themselves, and often they would get out of alignment. What we've added is we've added into the configuration to be able to display the header information and also the subheader information if you're setting up a subsection. And essentially what this means is that by ticking these options, you will have this extra section displayed here, which will show you the fields and the descriptions coming from the main header and the subheader. So then when you're setting up the actual body of the report and the interface file, you can actually align the fields, the field type to the actual header information. So for example, if this was a header called employee number, then you might put employee number here. If the header was called something else like amount, then you put a pay amount into here, and so on. So it just really streamlines the setup. We've also allowed you to, lastly, the column heading length has been extended on interface files. So previously that was about 40 characters. I think that's now been extended to 150 characters, so you can actually create quite long column headings on the interface files. So for example, the free text has been expanded out to be much longer. And lastly, a number of fields that have been added for different countries, for different info types, for payroll clusters, and so on. So we continue to add to the functionality of Easy Reporter as customers request additional fields. Okay, so that's the full list of changes. This is the full list of changes here that have been added into the release. There's been some quite substantial changes to Easy Reporter this release. So hopefully you'll find some good value from some of those changes. Thank you.